What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you guys another video. Today I'm bringing you guys a video on Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel, episode 14. This episode is called Sheriff Skyfire, and the episode overall was actually really good. I liked it a lot. It was a filler episode, but it was done well, and it featured a character which most people didn't expect to even be in this show because he is from a Japanese show that in America is unknown, and yet they managed to do it in a way where it really didn't matter because he's not as far as this show goes, he's not super important. As far as his history goes, he's like significant for his own show or series that he's part of, because he's part of the Metal Hero series in Japan, which he was around in like the late 1980s. So just to give you a bit of context for his origin, his name in Japan was known as Jiraiya, but in this show he was known as Sheriff Skyfire. So just wanted to bring that up. That's the big difference here. And because he's not so important to like the Power Rangers franchise, it really works in their favor, as opposed to if you compare it to something along the lines of the Super Mega Force Rangers that never existed in the Power Rangers franchise. The reason why that was a bigger problem for everyone is because those characters are completely unknown, and you're basically labeling them as Rangers, yet if you're a Ranger fan, you're going to look at them and say, who are these characters? You know, that's the bigger problem there. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems. There's a lot of reasons why that's a problem, but that's a big difference. You know, you could just call him whatever you want to call him, and that's the big difference here. It doesn't really matter what they give him a name for, as long as they don't as long as they don't refer to him as a Ranger. That would be an iffy situation. I mean, it could work if they do it well, but they didn't go that way, and I'm glad that they did, because it would have created a lot more problems than it needs to be, just because of how much original footage would have probably had to happen. So anyway, it's good. I'm glad what they did with him, and I thought that it was done well, even though it was borrowing from a crossover episode. So also wanted to mention, and we're going to get into that right away with the beginning of this episode, the episode starts with us seeing that they're introducing the villain for the episode, known as Blammo. Blammo is a monster that, you know, basically is known for creating bombs and, you know, exploding things. His name is very similar to monsters like Louie Kaboom and some of those older monsters. I immediately think about it when I hear the name. You know, just those simpler kind of silly names that work, which is not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. But anyway, what happens is that suddenly Sheriff Skyfire appears on the scene. He's gonna arrest Blammo, but what happens is that he's like about to take away him, and then Madame Odious appears and tells Sheriff Skyfire about how, oh, there's some evil, nasty criminals down on Earth that have stolen my prism, and you should go and I would really appreciate if you could go and help me. And he's like, oh, the fiends. So at that point, she's referring to the Power Rangers, and she's labeling them as bad guys. This is very interesting, this whole entire idea, because it's very similar to the Blue Centurion's story. The Blue Centurion from Power Rangers Turbo was different but similar. In the Blue Centurion's case, when he became evil, it wasn't by choice. It was more so he was reprogrammed during the episode A Millennium Message, which was episode 13 of Power Rangers Turbo. I actually looked that up already. So yes, it was a Millennium Message. This episode, though, instead of being reprogrammed, he's being tricked. But it still draws a lot of similarities. So it's kind of interesting, and a lot of people will be mentioning that idea of how they are kind of borrowing that plot idea without like completely copying it, because of that one factor, which is tricking versus brainwashing. Again, Sheriff Skyfire is not meant to be a robot, so that's why it works in their favor, of course. But anyway, what does end up happening is that the Rangers we end up seeing are down on Earth. They're doing their thing. What do you call it? Haley has brought in Cody, which we haven't seen Cody in a little while. I mean, Cody doesn't show up all the time, but it was nice to see Cody this episode. The thing is that Cody's around school, and what happens is that we end up seeing the security guard. The security guard ends up confiscating a girl's skateboard, and what happens is that Victor and Monty watch this, and they realize, they can collect free stuff. So they think, oh, we should join as student deputies to the security guard. That's what they decide to do. So at that point, they decide to take advantage of that and, do things in their favor. By that I mean create some rules of their own choosing, just because they feel they have the power to do that, like stealing a girl's banana by saying, you cannot eat bananas unless it is a full moon, which is complete nonsense, but it works, and it's not, and honestly, the story for them this episode was actually not that bad. Like, I actually didn't mind the kind of story that they were going for, because it kind of worked in their favor, and it was sort of this bully-like story, which is something that I could totally see these characters doing, and it felt good enough. It didn't feel like a super silly episode, although the end definitely shows their more silly side, which not many people will be fans of, but I think it was done well enough overall. Just so I get that out of the way with Victor and Monty, yes, this becomes a thing for this episode that we'll see a bunch. Anyway, what does end up happening is that we end up seeing the security guard, his name's Clint, comes over to Haley and tells her that you can't have a dog in the school. And the thing is that Haley's brought Cody into the school at least a dozen times. And so what happens is that Clint ends up writing her up for a dozen violations. And then she throws away a can in the paper recycling bin instead of the can recycling bin. And so she gets another write-up. So, in other words, she's in a bad situation, and, things are not going in her favor today. And, Clint constantly brings up the idea of how I don't make the rules, I just enforce them, which is true. That's how the security guards are meant to work in that way. So they're not really a fan of him, and things aren't really ideal. But anyway, what does end up happening is that the Rangers are, a little bit annoyed about the situation, and suddenly they end up getting a distress call from Mick, basically saying that there's buzz cams in the city and they need to go out and check on what's happening. They end up arriving there, and what we end up seeing is that Sheriff Skyfire appears on the scene. He ends up fighting the Rangers, which we end up seeing lots of cool battling occurring between all of them. And then what happens is that at one point, Sheriff Skyfire launches an attack which actually knocks over an old woman. And the thing is that Brody manages to leap down to the ground and quickly catch her before she falls and hurts herself. Thing is that Sheriff Skyfire apologizes for what he did, and at the same time, the lady says, you should be more careful with what you do. That could have hurt me. And what happens is that Sheriff Skyfire was confused by the whole situation because the Rangers actually saved the woman. And what happens is that they explain that we're actually meant to protect the Earth. We're here to, protect the Earth. We're not enemies. And the thing is that he mentions how Madame Odious had told him that the Rangers had stolen her prism, and they explained that no, she never had the prism. She stole it from us, and she's tried to steal it from us in the past. And the thing is that he ends up learning very quickly that all these things that she's been telling him are lies, that she has just been making up things to make him fight on her side. And so at that point, he ends up finding out about how they've attacked with several monsters, Madame Odious, and what happens is that Sheriff Skyfire wants a full report of all the monster attacks and all the monsters that have attacked Earth in the past because of her. So at that point, everyone but Haley ends up going back to the base to get a report of all the monster attacks, so that way Sheriff Skyfire has all that information so he can bring it back to his superiors. So what happens is that Haley, on the other hand, why is she not there? Well, apparently she ends up getting a message from the principal that she wants to meet her, and it apparently was made a while ago. And so when she arrives at the school, she ends up hearing from the principal that the principal wants her, because of all the violations she recently got, to organize all the recycling. So she has to go out to the junkyard and help out. In the meantime, what I forgot to also mention, and this happens just prior to this, like not right before it, I would say, we end up seeing that Blammo is actually summoned down to Earth to set a bomb in the junkyard for 3 p.m. because the only people that will be in the junkyard at that time will be the Rangers, because that's where they train. So the thing is that he sets the bomb, but then what happens is that I was saying, Haley has to go out right away to the junkyard to help deal with the recycling. And the thing is that the bomb is in one of those containers, but it's not clear as to whether or not it is a bomb. It just looks like a metal object that's circular. So what happens is that we actually see that Clint is there and he's doing the work. And the thing is that he is a person that wants to be on top of these things when it comes to recycling, when it comes to all this stuff, and also because of the fact that the recycling center is only open for another hour, so he knows if he waits on Haley, it's not going to get done, and they're not going to be able to get rid of all the recycling that day. So what happens is that we end up seeing Clint doing it, and Clint ends up mentioning, because of all the underappreciation he gets for his job and how no one really thanks him for for him protecting them and wanting them to be safe in every regard, he wants to give up his job and take another job instead. So what happens is that Haley feels bad for what she did, and all the Rangers do as well, because they've all been written up for other things. Kelvin, for example, apparently the other week had been driving his truck and ended up driving on the grass and got a violation. Sarah rode her hoverboard without a helmet. She got a violation. So everyone's had something, and some of the other Rangers I think mentioned things as well, but the whole entire idea is that they've all been violators before. And the idea is that they never thank him, they just complain and get upset, when in reality, he's not doing this because he hates them, he's doing this because he wants to protect them. And, when it comes to a hoverboard, if Sarah falls, she could hurt her. She could get an injury that will, lead to a concussion or a brain injury or a head injury, or say driving on the grass, people in the road. That kind of stuff those are issues. So what happens is that they want to go and make it up to him, but what happens is that we end up seeing that the Rangers arrive, leave Sheriff Skyfire, and they overhear that Clint's going to give up his job, and he's heading off to the recycling center. And what happens is that they end up discussing, Sheriff Skyfire shows that he now has to go on his mission to find the monster known as Blammo, and there's a bomb in the picture. And the thing is that Haley asks, what's that object in the picture? And he explains, Sheriff Skyfire explains that it is one of his explosive devices. And the thing is that Haley recognizes it as the same one that Clint found in the recycling that was metal, and he's bringing it to the recycling center. So that what happens is that the Rangers end up heading off to stop Clint before he brings it to the recycling center. And what happens is that Haley, prevents him from moving in his car. He gets out, and then what happens is that the Rangers all arrive on the scene. They end up grabbing the bomb out of the vehicle and finding it in a separate trash bin. And what happens is that there's only 10 seconds left, so Brody throws it into a manhole, and what happens is that it explodes. So at that point, Clint is relieved that he was protected by the Rangers, and at the same time, there wasn't any explosion that occurred that could have actually killed him, because that's what would have happened had the Rangers not shown up in time. So at this point, what happens is that Blammo shows up. He's not happy because the Rangers figured out his bomb was there, and what happens is that they begin to fight. We end up seeing them arrive at a different scene, which is a location that they use a lot in the show. It's a super common one. It's one that's used for a lot of musical scenes, or it's like the big stage that they use a lot of times with a lot of walkways and areas for people to be around. They've used it in Megaforce, they've used it in Super Megaforce, they use it in several different seasons. Even to this day, it's still used. It's such a commonly used setting, but it's a cool one that they use a lot. And so what happens is that the Rangers do elemental attacks. Preston, Calvin, Haley, and Sarah do, and then we end up seeing Levi does his finishing move, Brody does an attack, Sheriff Skyfire does an attack. We end up seeing that the Sheriff Skyfire does his finishing move, and then Brody does the Lion Fire mode, and he ends up finishing off Blammo. Then what happens is that Blammo is gigantified, the Rangers summon the Blaze Megazord, and they end up fighting Blammo. Blammo puts them down to the ground, and then at one point the Rangers come up with like this big fiery attack and beats them back, and then they end up doing their finisher to defeat Blammo. Blammo's destroyed. The Rangers are triumphant, and what happens is that they ask, so what do you do now, Sheriff Skyfire? And Sheriff Skyfire basically says that he's going to report back to his commanders about everything that happened and all the information he gained. And he says, I leave Madame Odious in your hands, basically. Like, I trust that I can leave her in your hands. And so they say, yes, definitely, we'll be able to handle her. And so the Rangers say goodbye to him, and we have no idea who he is. And as far as things go, whether or not he'll return, as of now, from what we've seen, especially if you've heard about any spoilers, it does not look like he will be returning. Just keep that in mind. Unless they do something for like a brief appearance in a holiday episode, I'll tell you this much right now. If they do anything at all, if they were to, it would have to be original footage anyway. So just understand, if anyone was expecting him to return, it shouldn't happen anyway. So understand that now. If you have any high hopes for a return, it's not going to happen. But it still was very cool to see him. I did enjoy him as a character. It would have been great to have seen him return more, because he is a cool character, and you never know what they do sometimes. Maybe they try to create characters like that are longer lasting, to give them greater significance and a bigger role. Thinking about the Phantom Ranger. The Phantom Ranger originally was from the Japanese season for Power Rangers Turbo. And the thing is that they actually used him in space as well, even though that character really wasn't supposed to be in that season at all. So that's something that's worth noting. That was original footage. Keep that in mind, because that's like the biggest example I can always think of where they did something that involved a lot more original footage. Anyway, as far as things go from here, what we do end up seeing is that the Rangers decide to do a surprise for Clint, where they actually create a special recycling device where if you put an object in the recycling bin that's the wrong one, it will say, it will like say a message about like how you're putting in the wrong one, and it will like toss it back out. And what happens is that you have to put in it tells them to put in the other one, like, this is not the right one, so then they have to put in the other one, and if they put in the other one, then it says, good, you're helping protect the earth or whatever. It says something along those lines. And so basically it helps Clint out. The Rangers all apologize for, not, giving him enough respect for what he does, and appreciation for him wanting to keep them safe. And they all wanted to keep his job, and he ends up agreeing in the end that he will stay and work and be there for them and everyone else. And he also mentions the perk of he got to meet the Rangers today, which was cool. So that whole thing happens. Then some people from the school end up asking for him to help out, because apparently a lot of stuff was stolen by Victor and Monty. There's an earlier scene where we end up seeing that Victor and Monty arrive in the school, and they steal these things that they see as blueberries from a science lab, and then a hat and a jacket from a guy. They just steal all these things that they're like, you can't eat blue food, you can't wear cool hats, you can't, I forget, there was like another one that they said, and it was just all these silly bits, but the whole entire idea is that they get away with a lot of stuff that really isn't theirs, and they just take it. And what happens is that Clint shows up on the scene, where we end up seeing this huge mess of stuff that they've collected, and they end up eating those 2 blueberries that they got from one of the students. The thing is that when they eat them, It's explained by the student that actually was making them that it actually isn't blueberries. Those are special astronaut food that that the guy has a failed formula going right now, and the reason why it's failed is because when someone eats them, we end up seeing then that suddenly Victor and Monty begin to turn like violet, or like, you know, sort of violet or blue, and what happens is that they turn into blueberries essentially. Like they blow up. They don't explode, but they become very big, and you know, their color of their face changes a lot as well. So that pretty much ends it with like them laughing and the episode ending. Overall, again, as I said before, this episode was good. I did like a lot of things that they did with it. I thought it was cool to see Sheriff Skyfire, even though it may, again, I thought that they did a lot of really good things with his character, even though he really isn't a huge character in the Power Rangers franchise. The fact that they made him work with the show was really good, and honestly, I felt like, you know, when I heard that he was going to be in this, it totally made sense, just because of the fact that he doesn't need to be a character that needs to be explained all that much. You know, would it be nice if we knew more about his origin? Of course, but if he's only supposed to be in one episode, I guess, I mean, I understand why they wouldn't develop him out more than they did. Would it have been nice to have a little bit more? Definitely, but I think that this was good, and I enjoyed the episode overall. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'd love to know your guys' opinions about this episode. Again, we are now 14 episodes in, so 6 more episodes and then Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel will be done, which is pretty crazy to think. And then we'll be starting Beast Morphers in February, so keep that in mind. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.